Imagine walking into a prestigious university full of seasoned professors who have taught for decades, only to be dismissed before you even open your mouth. They look at you, a young black woman, and assume you don't belong. What if I told you that despite their doubts, you were about to shatter their expectations in the most incredible way possible? The university was a symbol of excellence, its towering buildings and ivy-clad walls echoing the legacy of decades of academic prestige. Inside its grand lecture halls and libraries, the best minds in the country gathered, professors with decades of experience, their names well known in academic circles, respected by students and peers alike. The halls buzzed with intellectual debates, each word carefully weighed, each theory critiqued by those who had spent their lives perfecting their craft. To be part of this institution was to be part of a select few who could claim to understand the deepest intricacies of science, philosophy, and mathematics. Among these esteemed professors, however, there was a new face, a young black woman standing at the back of the classroom, barely noticed by the older established academics. She was not from a lineage of Ivy League scholars, and to many, her appearance in such a space seemed almost out of place. Yet, her presence was a quiet storm, waiting to rise. Her name was Maya. Maya had always been different, not just in how she looked, but in how she thought. From a young age, she had been captivated by numbers, equations, and the beauty of mathematics. While others saw the subject as cold and impersonal, Maya saw art. Every equation was like a puzzle, each solution a masterpiece. Her passion wasn't just for the concepts themselves, but for the endless possibilities they held. She spent late nights buried in textbooks, tackling calculus problems most of her peers couldn't even begin to understand. Her mind raced ahead, constantly seeking to push the boundaries of what she could learn and achieve. But it wasn't just about personal achievement for Maya. She wanted to show the world that intellect wasn't defined by skin color or background or any other superficial judgment. She wanted to prove that she too had the ability to stand shoulder to shoulder with the best minds in the world. From the moment Maya stepped into her first lecture, the undercurrent of judgment was impossible to ignore. She'd chosen a difficult path, one where she'd be surrounded by some of the most brilliant minds in the world, but also, in many ways, the most entrenched in their biases. In her first calculus class, a lecture hall full of eager students turned their attention to the professor as he presented a complex multi-step problem on the board. His eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on Maya, there was a brief, almost imperceptible glance that seemed to size her up. Not for her intellect, but for something else. As the lecture continued, Maya raised her hand. She had a solution to a particularly difficult problem, one that she knew would challenge even the most seasoned students. But the professor hesitated. His eyes flicked to her hand, then quickly back to the room, as though he was looking for someone else to speak up first. When he finally acknowledged her, his response was dismissive, a weak, "Let's hear what you think," almost as if he didn't truly expect her to have anything of value to say. When she confidently explained her solution, breaking it down step by step, there was a momentary silence in the room. The professor's face didn't show awe or even appreciation. Instead, he questioned her method, dismissing it as too simplistic and unlikely to lead to the right answer. His tone was condescending, as if implying she didn't fully understand the complexity of the problem. The murmurs of agreement from some of her classmates only added weight to the sting of his words. Maya could feel the eyes of her peers on her, some of them unsure whether to side with the professor or with the young woman whose solution didn't fit the mold of what they'd been taught. The more she spoke up, the more this treatment seemed to follow her. In office hours, when she tried to clarify her approach to the course material, the same dismissive attitude surfaced. One professor even told her that perhaps her skills might be better suited for a less rigorous field, suggesting she consider switching to something more practical than pure mathematics. The insinuation wasn't lost on Maya. They didn't see a brilliant student. They saw a black woman in a space where they assumed she didn't belong. Every word, every glance, stung. But it didn't break her. The frustration, the constant weight of being underestimated fueled a fire inside her. There were nights she felt like giving up, questioning whether it was worth fighting to prove her worth to those who didn't even want to acknowledge it. But something deeper than frustration kept her going. The professors in the back of the room leaned in, intrigued but still skeptical. They couldn't help but watch closely, waiting for her to make an error. Surely someone of her background couldn't approach such a complex problem in a way that made sense. But as she continued, her steps unfolded with such clarity, each calculation precise, each logic flawless. She was not just solving the problem, she was revealing its true beauty, unraveling it layer by layer, showing a depth of understanding that none of them had expected. Maya's solution didn't just work, it was elegant. The professors who had once doubted her exchanged glances. They couldn't deny what they were seeing. She was not just a student who had memorized the steps, but someone who had internalized the subject in a way that few could even dream of. She was innovating, thinking in ways that went beyond the traditional methods they had taught. The room fell silent, and for the first time, Maya's name didn't just fill the air with doubt. It filled the space with awe. Even the professor who had dismissed her so many times found himself struggling to find words. "That was impressive," he muttered, though the awe in his voice was unmistakable. Maya stepped back from the board, her heart racing, but her face remained calm. It wasn't the validation that she craved. She had known this moment was coming. It was the undeniable, irrefutable proof that she belonged here. Not because of what others thought, but because of what she was capable of. As the weeks passed, Maya's presence in the classroom became undeniable. The professors who had once looked at her with doubt now sought her out for discussions, eager to hear her take on complex theories. She no longer felt like an outsider trying to prove her worth. She was now seen as an equal, her brilliance recognized and respected by those who had once dismissed her. The weight of their judgment had shifted, but more importantly, so had Maya's confidence. She walked through the hallways of the university with her head held higher, no longer carrying the burden of trying to fit into a space that had never been made for her. She had carved out her place, not by conforming, but by showing the world exactly what she was capable of. Her journey wasn't just about proving something to others. It was about proving something to herself. Each equation, each challenge she overcame, strengthened her belief in her own abilities. And as she stood among her peers and professors, it was clear that the academic world was just as much hers as it was anyone else's. But her story is not just one of personal triumph. It serves as a reminder of how often talent can be overlooked because of superficial biases based on race, gender, or background. Maya's experience calls for a shift in how we view potential, urging us to see the value in individuals based on their abilities, not their appearance or the assumptions we place upon them. True excellence is not confined to any single mold, and academia, in all its prestige and history, should be a space where talent is nurtured, no matter where it comes from or who it belongs to. The real message here is simple. Talent is universal. The power of inclusion, of seeing beyond the surface to what truly matters, can change the course of history. Maya's success is a testament to the fact that we all benefit when we allow everyone to show what they're capable of, regardless of the biases that may cloud our judgment. The doors of academia, and any space of intellectual achievement, should always remain open to those who are ready to challenge and redefine the limits of knowledge. Maya wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every student who had ever been told they didn't belong, for every underrepresented voice that had been silenced by prejudice. She knew her abilities, her worth, and now she was more determined than ever to show the world just how wrong they were. One day, in the midst of a particularly difficult lecture, The professor, in an attempt to challenge his students, presented a problem on the board that had left even the most advanced scholars scratching their heads. It was a multidimensional calculus problem, one of those that required not only technical knowledge, but also creativity and a deep understanding of abstract concepts. The room was quiet as the professor asked, "Who can solve this?" Maya sat quietly at her desk, knowing that most students would shy away from this problem. She could feel the familiar weight of the room's expectations, the skepticism, the subtle underestimation of her abilities. But today, something was different. There was no hesitation in her mind, no second guessing. She had been waiting for a chance like this. With a steady hand, she raised her hand, her voice calm but confident. The professor glanced at her, a slight furrow appearing on his brow. His eyes briefly flicked to her peers, and the moment he saw no other hands, he nodded reluctantly. "All right, Maya, let's hear your solution." As she approached the board, the whispers began. Some students exchanged looks, others rolled their eyes, clearly not expecting anything remarkable. Maya's hands moved swiftly, chalk in hand, as she began breaking down the complex equations step by step. She didn't just use the standard methods that the professors had taught. She combined concepts from higher-level calculus and geometry, integrating them in ways no one had anticipated. The professors in the back of the room leaned in, intrigued but still skeptical. They couldn't help but watch closely, waiting for her to make an error. Surely someone of her background couldn't approach such a complex problem in a way that made sense. But as she continued, her steps unfolded with such clarity, each calculation precise, each logic flawless. She was not just solving the problem, she was revealing its true beauty, unraveling it layer by layer, showing a depth of understanding that none of them had expected. Maya's solution didn't just work, it was elegant. The professors, who had once doubted her, exchanged glances. They couldn't deny what they were seeing. She was not just a student who had memorized the steps, but someone who had internalized the subject in a way that few could even dream of. She was innovating, thinking in ways that went beyond the traditional methods they had taught. The room fell silent, and for the first time, Maya's name didn't just fill the air with doubt. It filled the space with awe. Even the professor, who had dismissed her so many times, found himself struggling to find words. "That was impressive," he muttered, though the awe in his voice was unmistakable. Maya stepped back from the board, her heart racing, but her face remained calm. It wasn't the validation that she craved. She had known this moment was coming. It was the undeniable, irrefutable proof that she belonged here, not because of what others thought, but because of what she was capable of. One day, in the midst of a particularly difficult lecture, the professor, in an attempt to challenge his students, presented a problem on the board that had left even the most advanced scholars scratching their heads. It was a multidimensional calculus problem, one of those that required not only technical knowledge but also creativity and a deep understanding of abstract concepts. The room was quiet as the professor asked, "Who can solve this?" Maya sat quietly at her desk, knowing that most students would shy away from this problem. She could feel the familiar weight of the room's expectations, the skepticism, the subtle underestimation of her abilities. But today, something was different. There was no hesitation in her mind, no second guessing. She had been waiting for a chance like this. With a steady hand, she raised her hand, her voice calm but confident. The professor glanced at her, a slight furrow appearing on his brow. His eyes briefly flicked to her peers, and the moment he saw no other hands, he nodded reluctantly. "All right, Maya, let's hear your solution." As she approached the board, the whispers began. Some students exchanged looks, others rolled their eyes, clearly not expecting anything remarkable. Maya's hands moved swiftly, chalk in hand, as she began breaking down the complex equations step by step. She didn't just use the standard methods that the professors had taught. She combined concepts from higher-level calculus and geometry, integrating them in ways no one had anticipated. Thank you for listening. Let's move on to the next story. Imagine this. You're sitting in a courtroom, watching a young teenager stand before a judge. At first glance, he looks out of place, maybe even clueless. But then, the judge starts mocking him, laughing at his inexperience. Little does anyone know, this teenager is not who he seems to be. He's not just some kid, he's a legal genius, and he's about to turn the tables in the most shocking way possible. The courtroom buzzes with the quiet murmur of spectators, the sound of papers shuffling, and the occasional click of a pen. The atmosphere feels heavy, tense with the weight of legal proceedings. The judge, a stern and experienced figure, sits at the front, his gavel poised and ready to command silence at any moment. His eyes scan the room, focused, professional, and unyielding. He's seen it all, or so he thinks. At the defendant's table, a teenager sits, looking out of place. His posture is a little slouched, his clothes too casual for such a formal setting. He's got the look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. His nervous fingers tap against the edge of the table as he glances around the room. His youth stands out, and so does his inexperience. He doesn't speak much, and when he does, his voice lacks the confidence one would expect from someone familiar with the law. To everyone in the courtroom, it's obvious. This is just a teenager, someone who stumbled into a situation way over his head. The judge watches the teen closely, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. He doesn't even try to hide his skepticism. It's clear he believes this teenager has no place here, and the courtroom is a place for serious legal minds, not someone who probably has no clue about what's really going on. The contrast between the judge's seasoned, authoritative presence and the teenager's awkward, almost out-of-place demeanor creates a palpable tension in the air. No one in the room expects anything extraordinary to happen. They just assume this is a case that'll be dealt with quickly and without fanfare. The judge leans back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he glances over the teenager. He clears his throat and lets out a low chuckle, his gaze never leaving the boy. "Well, this should be interesting," he mutters under his breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. The courtroom falls silent, a few people exchanging confused glances as the judge's tone shifts to something between amusement and disbelief. He turns his attention back to the teenager, who is now fidgeting with the papers in front of him. The judge raises an eyebrow. "You're representing yourself, huh? That's brave. Or maybe naive," he says, the last words dripping with sarcasm. The teenager looks up, clearly uncomfortable, but he says nothing. The judge smirks, leaning forward as if to emphasize his point. "You do realize this is a courtroom, not a playground, right?" He continues, his voice louder now, deliberately making the teenager the subject of everyone's attention. The judge shakes his head, almost pitying the boy. "I've seen kids like you come in here before, all eager to play lawyer. You're in way over your head." Around the room, there's a quiet chuckle, with some spectators sharing in the judge's disbelief. A few roll their eyes, muttering to each other, clearly thinking the same thing. This teenager doesn't belong here. The judge leans back again, crossing his arms as if the whole situation is a joke. "Let's see how long you last," he adds, almost challenging the teenager to prove him wrong. His voice is condescending, every word laced with an underlying assumption that this boy won't be able to handle the heat of a real legal battle. Meanwhile, the teenager remains silent, his face a mixture of unease and determination, though it's hard to tell if he truly understands the weight of what's being said. The judge is so sure of himself, so confident that this teenager doesn't have a chance, that he almost seems to take pleasure in mocking him. The case begins, and the teenager, still facing the judge's skeptical gaze, stands up. His hands shake slightly as he adjusts his glasses, but there's a spark in his eyes. For a moment, it seems like he's going to falter. But then, he takes a deep breath and begins to speak, his voice steady, more confident than anyone expected. The judge raises an eyebrow, still certain that this will be short-lived. "Well then, let's hear your defense," he says with a dismissive gesture. The teenager clears his throat and, without hesitation, launches into a well-reasoned argument. His first statement is concise, pointing out a small but crucial legal detail that the judge hadn't even considered. The courtroom goes quiet. Even the judge's confident smirk starts to fade, though he quickly recovers. As the proceedings move on, the teenager's responses grow sharper. When the opposing counsel tries to twist a point of law, the teenager effortlessly counters with a citation from a case that had been decided just a few months earlier. The room is stunned into silence. How could he know this? He's just a kid. But his knowledge is precise, and his delivery is spot on. The teenager handles each legal objection with a level of professionalism that no one anticipated. When the opposing lawyer tries to shift the argument with a technicality, the teenager immediately picks up on the flaw and calls it out with such clarity that even the judge can't deny it. His references to statutes and case law are flawless, and the judge, now furrowing his brow, begins to take note. It's as if the teenager isn't just following the rules, he's rewriting them, turning each challenge into a small victory. The judge's earlier amusement has all but disappeared, replaced with a sense of disbelief. How did this teenager, who looked so out of place just moments ago, become a legal force to reckon with? As the trial progresses, the tension in the courtroom becomes almost unbearable. The teenager has already outmaneuvered the opposing lawyer at every turn, and now it's time for the final argument. The judge, though still maintaining his composure, can't hide the growing unease behind his eyes. The teenager stands tall, a quiet confidence in his posture that wasn't there when he first walked in. The moment feels charged, as though the entire room is waiting for something to shift. The teenager looks at the judge, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor," he begins, drawing the room's attention, "before we proceed any further, I think it's time you knew exactly who I am." There's a brief pause, and the judge narrows his eyes, clearly confused. "What do you mean by that?" he asks, almost dismissively. His tone is more curious now than mocking, though a slight edge remains. The teenager takes a deep breath, then slowly removes a small folder from his briefcase and places it on the table. He opens it, revealing a collection of legal certifications, law degrees, and a list of cases he's been involved in. The room falls into complete silence. The teenager looks up, his gaze steady as he addresses the judge directly. "I'm not just a teenager trying to play lawyer," he says. "I've been studying law for the past 5 years, and I've been working with legal firms since I was 14. I'm not a kid, Your Honor. I'm a lawyer in training, and I've been handling cases like this for a while." A murmur ripples through the courtroom. The judge's eyes widen as the words sink in. His confident posture starts to crumble, replaced by a stunned silence. The spectators, once skeptical, now stare in disbelief. Some look at each other, trying to process the revelation. The judge shifts in his seat, his face flushing with embarrassment. The earlier smugness is completely gone. He clears his throat, now visibly flustered, and glances at the paperwork on his desk, unsure of how to proceed. There's a shift in his demeanor. What started as amusement has turned to genuine respect. The teenager stands, watching the reactions around him with quiet satisfaction. The atmosphere in the room has completely transformed, from mockery to awe, from doubt to admiration. The room remains eerily quiet after the teenager's revelation, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The judge, still sitting at the bench, takes a long moment to gather himself. His fingers tap nervously on the gavel, but his usual authoritative demeanor is nowhere to be found. Instead, he adjusts his glasses, staring at the paperwork in front of him with a furrowed brow. There's no smirk now, no mockery. just a lingering sense of disbelief. The opposing counsel, once confident, now shifts uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier cocky demeanor replaced by uncertainty. The spectators exchange whispers, murmuring about the teenager's accomplishments. No one can quite believe it. What started as a simple courtroom drama has turned into something far more extraordinary. The judge clears his throat, his voice much softer than before. "Well, it seems I misjudged you," he says, his tone now tinged with humility. The words, though not a full apology, are a recognition that he was wrong. The once mocking attitude has given way to an unexpected respect, one that's almost begrudging. The judge looks at the teenager, his face now serious but respectful. "You've handled this case with expertise far beyond your years." The teenager nods, his expression still calm, but there's a faint hint of satisfaction in his eyes. He doesn't revel in the judge's discomfort. His focus is on the case, on what he came to accomplish. He knows he's proven his point. As the case concludes, the teenager's success becomes evident. Not only does he win the case, but he also earns the admiration of those who once doubted him. The courtroom, which had once dismissed him as just another kid, now sees him for what he truly is, a capable and skilled legal mind. His victory isn't just about the case itself, but about changing the perception of everyone in the room. The spectators begin to look at him differently. What was once a quiet, awkward teenager has now become a figure of awe and respect. Whispers of admiration spread across the room, and even the opposing attorney can't help but nod in begrudging respect. As the teenager walks out of the courtroom, there's a newfound weight to his steps. His reputation has been changed forever. What had started as a mockery has transformed into a testament to his abilities. The judge's earlier skepticism, though still present in the back of his mind, is now tempered by the undeniable truth of the teenager's brilliance. As the case wraps up and the teenager walks out of the courtroom, one thing is clear: appearances can be deceiving. The judge, the opposing counsel, and even the spectators all made the same assumption. They thought they had this figured out. They looked at a young face, a nervous demeanor, and assumed he didn't belong. But in the end, it was the teenager's brilliance that stole the show. This story serves as a powerful reminder that we should never judge others based on their looks, age, or how they present themselves. Sometimes the most unexpected people have the knowledge, skills, and potential to surprise us. Intelligence and capability don't always come in the package we expect. For this teenager, this moment could change the course of his life. With his incredible success in that courtroom, word will spread. Legal firms may start to take notice, and doors that once seemed closed will now be open. His future in law is bright, and this experience will likely push him further into the spotlight as people begin to recognize the depth of his talent. So the next time you see someone who seems out of place or doesn't fit your expectations, take a step back. There's a lot more beneath the surface than meets the eye. And sometimes, the most remarkable people are the ones we least expect.